Thanks for tuning in to the Spread Your Wingspan podcast.
I'm Sarah.
And I'm Jennie.
And we're your hosts, two friends who immediately bonded over our secret smut addictions. So join us as we journey together through our favorite romance and fantasy stories and discuss all things kinks, female pleasure, taboos, and more.
Make sure to check out the show notes for any spoiler alerts and content warnings. We're happy you're here. Let's get to today's pod.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, Jennie.
I think you're really excited about today's podcast episode.
I'm so excited. I have been wanting to talk to Jennie about this book since I met Jennie.
It's true.
And as I got to progressively know you a little bit better and know that we shared, being raised as Christians, you had an even more intense experience in that than me, which again I learned over time. We shared a love of smut, obviously, but I think specifically there's like a BDSM vibe that we both enjoy, I think in different degrees, which will be very exciting to tease out over the next few weeks.
Yes.
And I was like, I know just the book for you. Spoiler warning for everybody.
Yes.
We are going to be discussing Priest by Sierra Simone. And then next week we are going to be discussing Sinner.
Correct.
So it's possible tiny bits of Sinner might bleed in this week. I don't think so, but just in case. We will not be discussing Saint, the third book, nor will we be discussing Midnight Mass, the novella.
Correct.
So those are your spoiler warnings. Trigger warnings for this episode, as I said, there's some BDSM present. I think more pressing is there is mention, not description, but mention of childhood sexual assault, specifically within the church. I think that's probably the biggest trigger. However, there also is a scene later in the book where a sexual act is initiated while one partner is asleep. It is written as consensual and pleasurable, but if that is something that is borderline for you, I think it is an important thing to know.
Agreed. I think maybe we should also mention that this whole book is a giant taboo. A giant on fire taboo, which is another kind of gray area that in our friendship we're kind of learning more about who likes what, who's into what, who might be open to some things, what things are a definite no, which I also find fascinating. Not because I have any judgment, but just like, why do certain people like this and why are other people like, nope, hard no, won't even touch it.
It's so fascinating, and I think, and I would love for us to continue exploring this on the podcast writ large. I think what's interesting to me is in learning what works for you and what doesn't work for me and vice versa, I'm learning more about why it works for me. So it's really like, I think it's less about the other person in that situation and more about a self-reflection of, what in my life or my temperament or what have you has led me to find this not just acceptable and permissible, but pleasurable. Mm-hmm. And then this other thing totally off limits.
Yes.
And I love that about the genre. And that writers are really willing to test us on this. And Sierra Simone,
she tests us.
As I've said to you, this is a milder series.
Which is crazy to me. So a few weeks ago, after I was, I think, halfway through Priest, I found on Sierra Simone's website, she has a 2-page PDF, a checklist of all of her books in reading order for all of her series. And I was like, Sarah, she's written so much. And some of which that you have said to me, like, it's pretty out there, like testing the limits.
Yes. The new Camelot series, which many people I think have heard of. I think it's what she's most famous for in addition to Priest. Tested my limits, but I still came on the side of I'm super down for that. Rereading it would be a choice for me to put myself through that again. And then The Lioness, which is kind of like a spin-off of the new Camelot series and is like a Tristan and Isolde kind of retelling. The new Camelot is Arthur, Guinevere, and Lancelot. Is a bridge too far for me thus far, to the point where I was like agonized reading it and still enjoyed it because she's a phenomenal writer. An insanely talented writer. We will definitely respond to
yes.
But anyways, yeah, so she definitely, and then I haven't read The Education of Ivy.
I don't remember.
I'm not saying that.
Just have dipped my toes in.
But I've seen lots of reviews for that one. The reviews are very mixed on that series. Okay. So yeah, I want you to read her whole catalog.
Oh, I will. Now that we have opened the box of Pandora, Well, yes. Okay. Eventually. It might take me a while, but eventually I will get through all of it.
Well, I guess that's a teaser for future books.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Anything else you want to say before I get into an overview of the plot?
Nope. I'm just excited to dive in.
Okay, wonderful. So for those of you who have not read the series, we're going to try to thread the needle between, obviously we're talking about the book, so there will be spoilers, and then leaving some room for you to be delightfully surprised as you are reading.
Yes.
So this is just like a general overview. Father Tyler Bell, who we adore, has a history of trauma with abuse within the church. His sister was abused by a Catholic priest and then took her own life. Trigger warning for suicide. I also forgot to mention that.
Yes, we will be good in our editing and put the content warning to the warnings.
Yes. That again, the scene itself is not described, but the aftermath is, so it can be definitely upsetting.
Yes.
Anyway, so his sister had that experience, but then he chose to become a priest, and then he is currently the priest of this small town where they also have a history of a former priest enacting sexual abuse, not being a good priest, real trauma for the town. So it's kind of this mutual, like, he's healing and he's trying to heal the town, and it's like his mission, his purpose.
His calling.
Or so he thinks. And he thinks that God has put him on this path for a reason. And then as he's working, he is in confession one day, and this new confessioner comes in, and the story really takes off from here. This new confessioner is Poppy Danforth.
Oh, Poppy.
A phenomenal woman, from a very wealthy background, extremely intelligent, has this kind of mix of very classy, proper, thoughtful, kind, and extremely dirty, very slutty in a great way.
Yes.
And she's confessing to him, and he is extremely turned on.
Yeah.
And from there transpires a dalliance between the two of them.
Yes.
Which we will get into at length. And then later there's this kind of villain character of an ex from her past who comes in, who disrupts things, which leads to Tyler having to reckon with whether or not he's leaving the priesthood. And that's a very, very general overview of it.
That was a great synopsis, though.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And then quickly, to say some of the themes of this work, it is very stream of consciousness, almost like a meditation or prayer. The themes is definitely love, especially as relates to God, which I definitely want to talk about today.
Yes.
BDSM and feminism is present. This is something that Tyler struggles with as somebody who is, it's not dominatrix when you're a man. What is the term?
I always have heard the term dom.
A dom.
A dom. Yeah.
He's a dom. I say he's a soft dom, based on what else I have read.
Still learning all of these terms.
We are making a glossary.
Yes.
He struggles with, I took feminism classes and I'm a feminist and what's feminist, and Poppy is a sub, and she also kind of instructs him in what's okay and not okay regarding feminism and dom sub. Very cool.
Yes.
And then finally, gray areas. Gray areas.
Lots of gray areas.
A huge theme, probably the thesis of this book, I would say. Okay. Yes. My spiel.
Yes.
Jennie.
Sarah.
Please tell me what you thought of this book.
Oh my gosh, this is my favorite smut book ever written. Or at least it was until I read Sinner. But I will save that. So what I didn't realize when Sarah was talking up this series, because you talked about priests so much, I thought, without doing any research, that the whole series was about Tyler. It's not. It's about Tyler and his brothers. So each book is about a brother. And I was reading that she's still writing them. The youngest one is going to get a book soon. So I'm very not like it's Bridgerton at all, but the Bridgerton books, each book follows, the love story of one of the siblings. So this is like your darker, smuttier, dirtier, sexier Bridgerton. Because those books are pretty vanilla, the Bridgerton books. I've read half the series. Very vanilla. So yeah, I got to the point that Sarah had been asking me to read this book so much that I was like, Sarah, I'll get to it. I promise I'll get to it. And then immediately 15 minutes into reading it, I think I texted you. I was like, why did I wait so long to read this book?
I'm pretty sure I got it all.
Yeah.
And I was like, she's still
And then, of course, I think you're like, I'm going to spend 30 minutes of the Priest podcast gloating that you should have read it sooner. So we won't spend 30 minutes. I'm just giving Sarah the credit now. Well chosen. So I'll just kind of get into the juicy bits of why I think this is my 10 out of 10 benchmark for all smut going forward. Anybody can write dirty stories. Literally anybody. I would like to think we would make better than average dirty stories.
I can
write them. Yes. But to be fair, like, dirty stories aren't that difficult to write. Writing novels that have character development and plot and challenging themes, that's difficult. That is not easy to do well. Sierra Simone hits all of those boxes in this one perfectly.
May I also add?
Yes, please.
Profound insights. That are not cheaply earned in any way.
Nope.
Like, truly had a few moments of, I have to reevaluate everything I think about God the first time I was reading this book. Did I expect to have that experience reading fucking porn? No. Okay.
Porn about a priest?
Porn about a priest. I expected just a fun romp.
Yeah.
A little taboo exploration.
Like, oh, he's wearing his collar. This is going to be cute.
And I literally had moments where I was either crying the first time I read it.
Oh, this book made me cry.
And again, like, I grew up raised Episcopalian. I grew up believing in God. I had currently that's a lot fuzzier for me, but like, it gave me so much more respect for Christianity in a certain sense. Anyways, I'm off topic.
No, that's
go
okay.
ahead. Yes.
So just to interject, I was raised Catholic, so I grew up going to Catholic churches. Grew up going and participating in that ritual and enjoying it as a child. It became quite fraught for me the older that I got and the more I started questioning things and the kind of closed door, you just have to accept it blind faith. And I'm not arguing that faith is irrelevant. I think faith is very important in our lives and it has its place. And that is one thing that this book really highlights, because the way that Tyler presents his calling to be a priest and the way that in his, kind of brain, when you're reading, or for me listening, which again, the narrator of these books is really, really talented and I thought added to the experience a lot. You really get the inner turmoil and not just the turmoil, you get the inner like grace that Tyler has being a priest and his relationship with God. And I will say, when they present his reasoning for joining the priesthood, and I'm like, I almost just kind of checked out right there. I'm like, yeah, there's abuse in the church, but like, really, is that a reason to become a priest? But for him, it really was.
Yes.
It really was. And that's something that I personally struggle with, the abuses in the church, and not just the Catholic Church, in all organized positions of power in organized religion. It's a very fraught, destructive thing in our society. Though he feels like he has to atone, it makes sense. It makes sense. His love of family, his love for his sister, his true desire to help the town heal from their experience. And also his parents through the book are very frank about why they don't go to church anymore.
And his brothers.
Yes.
He is the only one who has remained Catholic, who has retained Catholic faith.
Yes.
And then obviously chosen to work within the field.
Yeah. So that, to me, in and of itself could have been a novel. Never mind Poppy Danforth coming in. I would have read that novel very happily just to get Tyler's inner life.
Yes.
I think that would have been a beautiful book.
Yes.
And then you get Poppy. And I love that her name is Poppy. It delights me to no end. When you combine his inner world with her inner world and how they collide in this passion, it's absolutely breathtaking, I think.
It's stunning. I mean, it really... So we get her inner world through her confessions.
Yes.
Primarily. She does not have point of view narration in the book.
Except for when she's in the confessional.
Except when she's in the confessional and in the epilogue.
Correct.
Yes. So yeah, and what's beautiful about that is, again, Tyler's point of view is also a confessional. So they match. There is this lack of restraint in filtering their own thoughts for both of them. And so you really get to see people be vulnerable in this safe way.
Mm-hmm.
And then therefore you really understand where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
It's not filtered by, I'm censoring myself, or I'm trying to think about what you want to hear, what I want to hear, etc. And I think that device is really well employed by Sierra Simone. Again, the novel has just like really beautiful quality to it, where you just like really get sucked in, especially to Tyler's point of view and his thoughts. And you're really there with him as he goes through deconstructing why this is happening to him, how he is supposed to respond, what God wants from him or for him. He has a few characters along the way, his colleagues within the church, who help him in this pursuit. And again, I think in a way that will surprise readers. I think you might hear the plot of this and you're like, well, obviously, you know, Tyler, a father in the church, like this priest who has this history, and this town that has this history, and then he's having this very dirty BDSM sexual relationship with a parishioner. Clearly he's a bad guy. Clearly God is going to smite him, or bad things are going to happen to him. And instead the conclusion is, God loves me. This is what God wants from me. Mm-hmm. This is a gift. I'm getting goosebumps talking.
I know, yeah. And the way that their love is an expression of God's love.
Yes.
Which is everything that you're ever taught in Christianity, is that your life is meant to be a reflection and an embodiment of the infinite love of God. But
and put in a context of these BDSM sex scenes.
Yes.
Like, it's also true there.
Yes.
And boy, is it beautifully described.
Mm-hmm.
Again, if you're not into BDSM, I understand you might be wary to read this book. I would encourage you to, like, at least get to the first scene between them and then get an idea of, again, Tyler's thought process while he's in those scenes. I want to read a few quotes, if that's okay, while we're on this topic, unless you need to go.
No, there's one thing I don't think we've really highlighted, is that before Tyler joined the priesthood, his relationships were very sexual, and he was always in a very dominating role.
Correct.
And so he was not just a simple layperson just going about his life like, do. No, he actively would seek out relationships where he could dominate women. And as he says, you know, he always thought from a feminist perspective, it was always consensual. There was never anything nefarious about it. But he very clearly, when he gave up his lay life and entered one of celibacy, he was giving up like a very particular flavor of intimacy.
Such a good point.
Yes.
And part of the reason that Poppy fulfills that need so spectacularly is he has said, like, yes, his previous couplings were consensual, but he always felt like there was something missing. And this part is kind of dicey. He's like, you know, either they had like some damage in their past, or they were just trying it out. Mm-hmm. And then for Poppy, though, it is specifically also what she wants and needs, in the same way that he is. Like, they're just a perfect dom-sub fit. Mm-hmm. And that is an important part of the book. Yes, but so thank you for bringing that up. That's an important thing to talk about. To get back to the way that he realizes God's love while he is fucking Poppy. And there's two quotes that I highlighted. These are both things he's thinking while they're having sexual encounters. Mm-hmm. The first is, sacred and profane were blending and blurring together, fusing and welding themselves into something new and whole and singular. And if this is what love was, then I didn't know how anyone could bear the weight of it. And the second is, it came to me that there was no sin here. This was love. This was sacrifice. The opposite of sin. And maybe it was fucked up to feel like God was here with us in the back room of a strip club, but I did. Like he was bearing witness to this moment where Poppy opened herself to the worst of me and erased it with her love, just like God did for us sinners every moment of every day.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many layers in those quotes, because I think as women who were raised Christian, different denominations, different styles, but still, Jesus was kind of the cornerstone of the game. You really are taught that your body is for your husband alone. Heteronormative, very meek misogyny there. That pleasure is evil. Yeah. I can never remember any type of conversation as a teenager when I was doing the classes to make my confirmation, we talked about basically everything else, but we could never talk about sex as a group.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, not that that's surprising. I'm sure that's kind of how most youth groups are operating. But when you make something so hush-hush under the rug, there are so many ways that sexuality can be stunted and shameful and full of guilt and misinformation. And for me, I think misinformation is something that can cause a lot of internal shame, guilt, all of those words, but strife. I think that's what I was looking for, strife.
I mean, and that's what leads to when it becomes corrupted within yourself and criminal and awful, right? It was when people aren't able to, and not in total, not everybody, I think in general, that internalized shame then leads you down more evil paths.
Yes. And also leads to predatory behavior from people in positions of power.
Yes.
So the beauty of this book, in a way, was quite healing for me. Because I think that I can lump kind of my religious views and on how I was raised into one category of ick. You know, just from my experience of being a girl, growing up, becoming a woman, not wanting to participate in things, but having family pressure to do so. And, you know, I think in my own internal world, I've always known who I was, but I did not feel for a very long time, and still sometimes struggle with this at 40, to being my own authentic expression. Just without anything else, just who am I? Who is Jennie? Who do I want to be? How do I interact with the world? And to even open the door, I am not Christian, I'm not religious, I'm very spiritual. I do have a relationship with a higher power. I have a really hard time naming what that is. I don't necessarily call it God or goddess, or I usually refer to it as the universe or higher power.
Myself as well.
Yeah. But I think that the beauty of this book is that there's a little crack now to kind of want to integrate my experiences. The ones that I had when I was a child were pretty pure, so those I can look back on with fondness. But the experience I had within the church as a young adult, there's so many layers, and I've never really wanted to explore it. And so this book really made me think, like, how could I start to just like kind of maybe keep pushing that door open a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And I think that is the beauty of great literature, period. I don't care what the content is, that if a book can lead you to do some type of inner inquiry, that to me is the hallmark of great literature.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, like this book, I hope you can tell from the quotes I have, this book is a treat to read. Like the language, the descriptions. She is so skilled at transcribing emotions. And again, in a way that feels so authentic and insightful. You know, it's almost like Tyler is enacting his own therapy at times. And again, as a priest, he fulfills a counselor therapist role occasionally with his parishioners. And so it makes sense that he approaches life and thought that way. And he is not, I know I'm really praising him, he is not a perfect person or a perfect character either. And he really struggles. I mean, if you have ever struggled with anything, but like struggled with your own urges, your own desires, your own actions, feeling intense guilt and shame after taking actions you thought were wrong, and how you treat yourself after that, I think this will really speak to you.
I agree. For both of them.
For both
of them. I mean, we do get far more of Tyler's perspective. But what is offered during Poppy's confessionals also gives you a glimpse of that inner turmoil. You know, how, you know, I don't want to give away too much of the plot, because I do think that the unfolding of kind of the secrets of it are part of what makes this so spectacular. But the way that, from a very different upbringing and a very different kind of origin story, the way that Poppy struggles with coming to this moment in time with Tyler also has a lot of, you know, not quite self-loathing, but the choices that she ends up making, I think she is punishing herself.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Yeah.
And then inadvertently punishing Tyler.
Yes. So yeah, they couldn't really be any more different when they come together, but it's I think what I'm trying to say is the inquiry on how to be a good person and how to be good in a relationship and how to navigate a relationship respectfully with somebody else. They do it thoughtfully together.
I agree. And I don't think we've said, but she is not raised religiously. She has no background with religion or faith. But she is coming to confession for a reason. She is seeking religion. She's independently of Tyler being a very, very hot priest. She is seeking church. And that is something she pursues throughout the entire novel. That is influenced by Tyler in that she has a relationship with him, but it is a separate pursuit for its own means, and it is equally beautiful.
Agreed.
And that's fascinating because I don't know if I know many people or have read many stories about an adult choosing to become part of a religion they were not raised in.
It's the only time I ever really hear about that I'm just doing a quick catalog of novels, but in real life is when people want to marry somebody of another religion, and it's kind of a requirement, whether it's, initially a choice or it becomes a choice. That's the impetus for people, in my experience, the stories I've heard, to convert or
There's
seek.
usually an external reason.
Yeah.
I did a girl I did theater with in high school. I learned she wore, I'm not going to say the word because I'm going to get it wrong. She wore a head covering. Mm-hmm. I don't know which particular kind. I'm very sorry for that, but I absolutely do not want to say the word. And I assumed that was familial and cultural. And I in speaking with her one day, found out that she converted to Islam by herself. None of her family was Muslim. Mm-hmm. And she was a teenager. And that was fascinating. She was the only person, and she was still a child. So I really wish I could go back in time and kick my younger self to be like, you should have more conversations with this fascinating and beautiful young woman, because I wish I had learned more. But that's the only person, as I was reading this book the first time, who came to mind. I thought of her a lot, actually. Anyways, tangent.
We're full of tangents when the books are this juicy.
I feel like we've talked a lot about the beauty, the profundity, the insight. I would love to spend a little time talking about the sex.
Yes, and the taboo.
Because this is Spread Your Wingspan.
Yes, we're going to get dirty. So I will share with you all that I mentioned I did consume this as an audiobook. So we're sitting here in my home in the room that my husband typically works in. He is not here today, so we take this over when we record. But my husband was in here. The door was shut. I had my AirPods in. I was cooking. Oh, that's right. I was making meatballs because I was hosting a dinner for friends that night, and I'm Italian, and I was going full Italian. So I was chuckling that I was reading this book about a priest cooking meatballs. It's having a full Italian afternoon. And when the book got to the very first scene, I could not contain myself. I was giggling, listening to Tyler in my ear. And the things that they do and the places that they do them, again, I really don't want to offer too many spoilers just because it's delightful to let it kind of unfold.
We could say a few things.
But we can say a few things. I'm just trying to really, be conscious of wanting
the locations.
Yes. So, the first location, I think, is on the altar.
I think it's on the piano in the church.
Is it?
It's close to
the altar. It's in the church, that's for sure. There is definitely some altar action at some point.
Oh, there's big altar action.
And there is acquiring of sacred anointing oil from the tabernacle for use.
Very sacred, rarely used oil that is then used liberally.
Yes.
In a specific application.
Yes.
I teased her about this. When I was selling her on this book, I used to be a bookseller, folks, and I was doing the old bookseller pitch. And I'm like, at one point he uses sacred oil in a sexual act very successfully. And then she gets to that scene.
And I won't reveal the text, but I was just like, Sarah, he got the oil from the tabernacle. What is happening? Which, by the way, I can smell that oil right now. It has a very particular, I think they describe it as balsam in the book, but it's this piney, they use it at christenings. They use it, during sacred rituals. And so this sense memory of being raised in the church. And when he talks about how he likes to keep incense burning all the time because he loves the ancient rituals. And he feels like that really evokes kind of the
and opens the pathway to God, however he describes it. I can like smell all of it. And so that to me, really having these memories that are very innocent and very proper and very, mundane, and then reading these scenes, this is where I started really, I think I even said to you, I said, I think my taboo line just shifted more left. I was never bothered by any of the scenes. And I think some people might have a bit of a like, whoa, what are they doing?
Because, and doing it where, when?
Yeah, and how. But for me, I really leaned into that, like, wow, what does profane mean and what does profound mean? And I think that those words were in one of the quotes that you just read. And so that really became just kind of my inquiry reading this, like, well, who gets to define profane and who gets to define profound? We've had these religions, some of them for thousands of years. The world has definitely shifted over millennia. So also I think for me, like, what is the role of tradition and what is the role of agency? And I think that was when I really settled in and I was like, all right, well, I've already buckled up. I'm going to go along for the ride. And I was like, oh, wow, okay, she went there. She goes there. And I really respect Sierra Simone. And I know you did not read Midnight Mass, but Midnight Mass is a continuation of Tyler and Poppy's story in a novella, which I thought was beautiful. Some content in there could be troubling for people. If we ever discuss it, we will give you that warning. Maybe look up on the internet if you want to read it. But the continuation of inquiry between Tyler and Poppy, I thought was really beautiful.
Yeah.
So yeah, things don't really end for them at the end of this book.
Yeah, and they're mentioned, they come up in the subsequent books as well. So yeah, you're not totally left off being like, what happens to them.
Yeah.
Do you want to circle back a little bit?
Yeah.
Let's moved on from the sex.
Yes, sorry.
Because something that came up for me as I was reading this, and it's come up actually for me in a lot of smut, is the tension of we shouldn't be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, for me, simultaneously alluring and intriguing and very hard for me to read. And the first time I read this, I struggled a lot more than the second time I read this. The second time I read this, I was like, I know what happens.
Yeah.
I'm okay.
I'm excited.
And we've talked in previous podcasts about how, as for me as a person with intense anxiety disorders, occasionally the second reading of a book is more pleasurable for me because the anxiety is removed. And this was a book where I experienced that. It was less profound upon the second time, of course, again, because I already know what happened.
Yes.
But the first time reading it, I did have this reaction of like, why is he doing this? You're being a bad man. Stop, And then also I was like, no, but do it though, because it's really hot. And Poppy is so, you want to fuck Poppy, and not just because of the sex, but because you're he has this sense of he wants to climb inside of her brain, and then you as the reader feel that way. You're like, I want to eat.
Yes.
I want to consume her.
Yes.
It's this very strong, and so you're very on board for them consummating any of that feeling.
Yes.
Because there's tension building. Mm-hmm. It's medium burn, I would say, medium to fast. They get together relatively quickly, but there's a lot of tension put out first.
And a lot of back and forth.
So you're ready for them when things start going.
Mm-hmm.
And boy, do they start going. But I'd say the first two main scenes, one is after confession and the other is at his house. And they do not have fully penetrative sex. It's really borderline at one point. So it's all about the tension of we shouldn't be doing this, we want to be doing this. And I'm still trying to puzzle out for myself why I get so upset about it. And I'm really trying to work through it, and I don't know why, actually. I'm a very rule-following person, so it's possible that's a big cornerstone of it. But it's well, these aren't real people, Sarah. Right? There are no consequences because none of this is real. So but it does click into that part of my brain for me of the consequences. And I get anxious for everybody. So that was where I kind of ended up is I think I just want everyone to do, I'm very concerned with being ethical and moral myself. I try to do the right thing. often that leads me to a place of increased anxiety, and people in my life have encouraged me to let go of it. There's a reason I'm vegan, for example. Like, I try not to kill bugs. Little things. Not to say that I'm really not trying to be like, I'm such a great person. But rather, this is just a strong concern for me in my life. So I think I then project that onto characters.
Interesting.
And again, I was really trying to figure this out as I was reading a second.
Can I offer maybe an inquiry? Just as you're saying this and knowing you and adoring you and loving you and like you, and also you weren't coming off as preachy. I think you were just really trying to explain like, this is my perspective. I think as a woman who was once a girl who used to have a lot of really deep rooted internalized shame and guilt and fear. Like, fear was a really big thing for me, that if I ever made the wrong choice or said the wrong thing or made the wrong move, there was going to be consequences.
Yes, well, yeah, that.
And not to say that there aren't decisions that you make that do have big consequences.
That's a really large part of
the Of course, there are. But I think that the way that my brain was formed and the way that my relationship with the world developed, I really would conflate like big punishments to really small mistakes.
Yes.
And I've really had to do a lot of work to not get into that pattern.
That tracks.
Yeah.
Me as well. Very much so.
Yeah. And so I think that you and I read these books because we do get attached to characters and we want to live vicariously through them. Mm-hmm. And by doing that, kind of just like putting ourselves in their shoes, then we are going to feel the feelings of trepidation and nerves and, oh my God, what am I doing?
What have I done?
Yeah. But even I think the perspective that can be gained is Tyler ends up okay in the end.
He does.
So okay. And not just okay, like he makes the choice that is right for him.
Yes.
Even removing Poppy from the situation.
Completely. Honestly, that's the point of the book. It's not really about Poppy ultimately.
Yeah. She might be the impetus.
And that's his conclusion really, is that God placed her to be the impetus and to be part of his life, but like for him to deviate from the path that he was previously on, which he thought was the path God wanted him to be on.
And it was the path that God wanted him to be on.
Correct. Because it was part of the journey.
Because it was part of the journey. Yes. And so, I mean, maybe that's another point in the, like, why are we rule followers? This is also something I've had to learn, that I make decisions based on the information I have at the time. Mm-hmm. And I can't blame myself later on if I have new information or new experiences for the choices I made without that insight.
Boy, is that true.
I mean, we just have to do the best we can. We have to go through the world with our values and our morals wherever they are, however they lie, which I think that, ties into the theme of this book.
And that is what really made me cry. Yes. That aspect of it. And that's probably why it made me cry. That aspect of how do you forgive yourself for being human?
And give yourself grace.
And give yourself grace.
For being human.
And recognize that that's the whole point. There is no need to forgive, essentially, is the ultimate conclusion.
Yeah.
And for anybody out there who has struggled, again, with feelings of guilt and shame about, to get that permission from his author via this novel, I think you will experience a weight lifted off of your shoulders when you read this, truly.
Agreed. I think this book and this series, because, we'll get into Sinner next time, and that has its own religious taboo bend. I mean, this Catholic family really is getting around.
I mean, spoiler alert, and you had this experience as well. Sinner is my favorite.
Sinner might be my favorite too.
And I told her this, I was like, Priest is good, Sinner is great. I mean, Priest is great. Sinner aligned more with taboos that I struggle less with. And I think maybe that's why I dove in a little bit more wholeheartedly.
Yes. I can see the position of
the
power.
Tropes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Worked for my perversions.
Is there anything else we want to say about Priest? I do. I feel like Sierra Simone it's the gift that keeps on giving.
I would say, again, for anybody who's listening to this, is like, I'm interested. She almost always writes BDSM sex in her smut. The Misadventures series, specifically Misadventures of the Curvy Girl, which for everybody out there who is in a non-straight size body, who is in a larger body, who is like never represented, Sierra Simone and Julie Murphy, is that her name? She wrote Dumplin'. They have a series together, Merry Little Meet Cute. Also has a larger body protagonist. Misadventures of a Curvy Girl. She does struggle with her internalized fat phobia and her body a bit throughout the book, so it is a little bit like intro to having a larger body protagonist, I would say. It is very sexy. It is not BDSM, but it is a male female throuple. It is so fucking good, you guys. And so if you're a little bit less into, leashes being used and, forceful blowjobs and stuff like that, amongst other things, and intense spanking, again, amongst other things, maybe start there and see. But again, be warned that, again, Priest, I think, is a great entry to kind of soft BDSM. But her other books, her other series, are a lot more hardcore in that regard. So again, if you're like, oh, I really want to read this writer, again, I would just, not as a warning, but I just want you to be aware.
Informed.
Yes.
Informed.
Yes.
We like you to be informed.
Yes, correct. Yes. What's your favorite scene? I just want to know before we go. In a non-spoilery way.
Oh gosh. The sex is great, but the scenes in the internal dialogue where Tyler is questioning whether or not he should leave the priesthood are my favorite.
Yeah, some of my favorites are the ones with his confessor, who he goes to.
Yes.
The other priest who he seeks confession from.
Yeah.
And the way that priest interacts with him is so beautiful. Again, made me cry. You're expecting, I think, a very different reaction than what you get.
Yes. And that priest, his confessor, is like almost prophetic. So there's this really neat, like
God literally.
Like he has a straight line to God in the way he talks, and like he's almost kind of predicting and just knows immediately without Tyler speaking. Also, is it Millie? Is Millie the character?
Yes, the church.
Love Millie. Yes. The church lady who is a straight shooter and also immediately knows what's going on and gives Tyler permission to not shut down his feelings.
Yeah.
And I think...
And she kind of becomes this like metonymical character for the whole town, kind of representing the town. Mm-hmm. And that, again, is just like a stunning part of this book.
Yeah.
5 stars. 10 out of 10. It's on the list of best books I've ever read. Categories, not including any categorization. Not one of my favorite smut books, not one of my favorite romance books, just one of my favorite books. And, would I share that with my mother? No. If I went to the bookstore, would I be choosy about who I share that information with? Did he sell it at the bookstore? No. But, like, if I'm being honest, I'm like, yeah, this is up there with Transcendent experiences, and I will go back and reread this throughout my life, and I will continue to enjoy it. And you're gonna have some great, if you've got a partner, friends, or not, solo, you're gonna have some great times after reading, during reading.
I think Sarah, when I told her I was reading, she's like, make sure you charge your vibrator.
Correct.
So it's gonna be a wild ride. It's good. Which is also why I love audiobooks. Audiobooks are great.
You don't have to do the 2 minutes. I struggle with, juggling all the items. Yeah. Because I don't do audiobooks generally.
Well, she has access to my Audible, so she
started
do audiobooks. Yeah. But you will do the audiobooks if you've already read it in a physical book.
Correct. Because I have a hard time. My mind tends to then be thinking about something totally separate, and then I'll realize chapters have passed. Yeah. And then I don't like to miss things, right? So, and then I'll go back, and it'll happen again, and then again.
Well, what we should also do in our show notes is I should bookmark the scenes, timestamp the Audible scenes, which I think I don't know if Audible still does it. I think they did away with it. They used to have an Audible romance subscription where they actually would give you, how spicy things were, where the spicy scenes were. I mean, on some episode we should talk about apps like Dipsy that are just audio porn perhaps.
Which you told me about, which I have gotten Instagram ads for.
It's great.
And have not yet explored, which is silly, but...
They have started writing fantasy series. Yeah, there's some vampire stuff, there's some fae stuff, and Dipsy is not the only one, but it's the one that I've enjoyed the most. Anyway, topic for another pod. Future pod.
Okay, so next week we will be discussing Sinner.
Yes, we will.
Get excited. There's more church, religion, taboo.
Mm-hmm.
There is an age gap taboo.
Big
And then my favorite, brother's best friend.
Oh, yeah.
Do I have an older brother? No. Did I always want him for this reason? Yes. My sister didn't have male friends, which was a real bummer to me growing up. My little brother's best friends often, tried, but sorry guys.
Yeah.
Usually also 7 years younger.
No, wouldn't happen.
Anyways, cannot wait to talk about Sinner. Would love to know, for those of you that have read this book, please go to our Instagram at Spread Your Wingspan. Any of the reels, any of the content I make about Priest, please comment.
Let us
Would
know.
love to know your thoughts. And I actually truly mean that. Not to generate engagement. I want to know what everyone else thinks of this book. We would love to talk about it more. If we get really cool conversations going, we'll bring it up in a future podcast.
Yes.
So follow us there, obviously.
Yes.
Anything else?
No, I think that's it. I think we're both just so excited we don't really know how to wrap this up.
Start talking about Sinner.
All right, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Spread Your Wingspan podcast.
We would love to hear what you think about our topics today. Be sure to connect with us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel.
You can find us on both with the handle at Spread Your Wingspan, and all the links and more fun stuff are found on our website, spreadyourwingspan.com.
And if you have a book or author you want us to check out, send us an email at hello@spreadyourwingspan.com to tell us.
We hope you tune into the next episode.